Administration on the cusp of its first major legislative win as members of the president's transition team level accusations of wrongdoing against special counsel Robert Mueller. I'm Molly Line. This is the Fox Report. Trump transition officials raising a red flag over the Mueller investigation. In a letter to lawmakers, they accuse the special counsel of inappropriately demanding transition documents from the General Services Administration, apparently as a workaround for issuing subpoenas. More on that in just a moment. But first, President Trump heading to Camp David as the GOP announces it has the votes to pass tax reform. The president celebrating what would be a much-needed victory for the party after its repeated failures to repeal Obamacare. The president also hitting back against criticism that the bill would add $1.5 trillion to the debt while increasing taxes for some middle-class Americans.
If you look at the whole thing, everybody's going to benefit. But I think the greatest benefit is going to be for jobs and for the middle class. We think $4 trillion will come flowing back into the country. That's money that's overseas, that's stuck there for years and years. This is going to be one of the great gifts to the middle-income people.
Garrett Tenney has more from the White House. Garrett, how is the president feeling about these chances for tax reform this week?
Well, Molly, President Trump is confident that Congress will be able to have a bill on his desk by the end of this next week. And you really can't overstate how big that would be for this administration, which after 11 months is still looking for its first legislative victory. Now, today, the president was talking about the economy again. That has been a constant win for him and his administration as it has continued to grow. But as he departed the White House, he said tax reform will allow the U.S. to take its economy to a whole other level.
I will say, because of what we've done with regulation and other things, our economy is doing fantastically well. But it has another big step to go, and it can't take that step unless we do the tax bill.
In terms of what that growth could look like, the president said that with tax reform, he thinks the economy can go from the current 3% growth a year to 4, 5, or even 6%. And that would mean trillions more dollars in the U.S. economy. Molly?
There always seems to be developments. What else do we know about these new accusations against the special counsel's investigation?
Well, today an attorney for the Trump transition team accused special counsel Robert Mueller's team of acting inappropriately and obtaining some of the transition's privately owned materials and data. In a letter to the congressional committees charged with government oversight, the attorney claims that Mueller's office went behind the transition team's back to obtain tens of thousands of emails in addition to laptops, cell phones, and other materials belonging to 13 top transition team members. The letter claims that instead of obtaining a subpoena and going through the transition, as investigators were supposed to do, Mueller's office sent letters to the General Services Administration, which provided office space, supplies, and email services to the Trump transition, and since the inauguration has acted as a custodian for the team's materials and data. Once Mueller's team obtained those items, the transition team claims they were never informed that their property had been taken. The attorney also complains that many of the emails are protected by either presidential privilege or attorney-client privilege, and that Mueller's team admitted it failed to take appropriate steps to protect those communications. The letter to lawmakers states, while transition teams and their members are not immune from the lawful search and seizure of their documents and records, it is vital that these investigations be conducted within the parameters of procedural safeguards that preserve legitimate privileges, many of which have a constitutional provenance. Now, the transition team also argues this situation could set a precedent for future transitions, and that if something isn't done by Congress, that the documents and the data and materials of future transitions could be at jeopardy of being misappropriated by government agencies as well. And this evening, White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders responded to this report by saying the administration continues to cooperate with Special Counsel Robert Mueller's team and that they expect this investigation will wrap up soon. Molly?
Yeah, another fascinating week ahead on Capitol Hill, and interesting to hear that from the White House. Garrett Tenney, thank you. More now on the push for tax reform. The House is set to vote on the final tax bill Tuesday, with the Senate following suit either later that day or perhaps Wednesday. The upper chamber is expected to pass the legislation on a party line vote after winning over the holdouts, Marco Rubio and Bob Corker. Former Utah Congressman Jason Chaffetz applauding his colleagues for keeping their eye on the prize.
position, right? Heaven forbid that the American people be able to keep their own money in their own pockets. I think they will unanimously vote against it, but hats off and applause to Kevin Brady and Orrin Hatch, the two leaders in the two bodies. It is a compromise. I'm sure there's certain parts that people would want to change. There's certain things I would want to change, but the reality is more than $1 trillion will be saved and put back into the American people's pockets, and that's going to be a huge win.
All right, our own Caroline Shively has the latest from Washington on this. Caroline, they were making changes right down to the wire. What's in this final bill?
Some major cuts and some minor compromises, Molly. They had to give on a few issues to get some Republican senators who were still holding out. The final version keeps 7 tax brackets, reducing 5 of them from 10% on up to 37%. The corporate tax rate is slashed from 35% to 21%. The bill also repeals Obamacare's individual mandate while retaining a deduction for medical expenses. The standard deduction would be nearly doubled, so would the child tax credit. Filers who itemize would lose some deductions, others are capped. That one's going to hurt for people who use those deductions in high tax states. Here's both sides' take on it.
I think maybe the most important element people aren't yet thinking about is this April 15th, when you file your taxes, that is the last time you will file under this monstrous broken tax code.
God bless wealthy people. I'm glad we have them. But they don't need a tax break. It's average middle-class people and people struggling to get to the middle class who need those breaks.
The polls show it is not popular with most Americans, but Republicans say that'll change once people see more money in their pockets. Democrats say that's true if you're a millionaire. No Democrats are voting for it. Molly?
All right. Well, Republicans seem pretty optimistic. Do they have the votes to pass it?
Yeah, it looks like it. The House has been pretty solid. The Senate was the big question mark, but they may have all 52 Republicans voting for it. 2 Senate Republicans flipped a yes late this week. Marco Rubio had wanted concessions on the child tax credit. He got them. Bob Corker had said he wouldn't vote for anything that adds to the deficit. This bill is forecast to add $1.5 trillion to the deficit over a decade, but in the end, Corker said the country is better off with it. The Senate voting after the House should give Republicans Thad Cochran and John McCain an extra day to recover.
A billionaire philanthropist and his wife found dead in their Toronto mansion. Investigators say the circumstances surrounding the deaths of Barry and Honey Sherman appear suspicious, but they're stopping short of calling this a double homicide. Sherman is the founder of Canadian pharmaceutical giant Apotex. Now, his net worth is estimated at more than $3 billion. Several people killed, hundreds injured, but Palestinian protesters are not letting up. Rioters in the West Bank outraged over President Trump's decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. But as our Kitty Logan reports, these protests aren't just happening in the Middle East. They're popping up all over the world.
Hi, Molly. Well, tensions have been running high since that decision by President Trump to recognise Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. There have been more clashes today between Palestinian protesters and Israeli security forces. The trouble flared shortly after the funeral of one of those protesters. The announcement by President Trump has angered many Palestinians. They regard East Jerusalem as their own capital of any future state. But Israel has welcomed the US decision. Israeli security forces also clashed with a group of Palestinian protesters in Jerusalem today. While the demonstrations haven't been on a large scale yet, they show no sign of diminishing. 8 Palestinians have been killed in violence since this latest wave of protests began. There were also funerals held in Gaza today for protesters who were killed there on Friday. And the protests have been worldwide. Today there was a demonstration in the German city of Frankfurt to voice disapproval of the US decision to recognise Jerusalem as the Israeli capital. Many in the Arab world say this move will damage the peace process. And Vice President Mike Pence will be travelling to Israel on Wednesday. More demonstrations are expected to coincide with that visit. Molly?
All right, our Kitty Logan, thank you. It is full steam ahead for GOP lawmakers after releasing a final tax bill and coming that much closer to delivering President Trump's first big legislative victory. Will it be the economic boost that Republicans claim? Plus, sexual harassment allegations derail another political career. What a Democratic congressman is saying about the accusations that will keep him from seeking another term in office.
Coaching means.
I'm Molly Line, and this is the Fox Report. It is the bottom of the hour. If you are just joining us, a Democratic congressman joins a growing list of lawmakers to resign or to not seek re-election in the wake of sexual harassment claims. Congressman Ruben Kihuen of Nevada announcing he will not run next year. That decision coming amid accusations from two women of sexually inappropriate behavior. Kihuen has denied those claims. Meanwhile, a Democratic candidate from Kansas ends her campaign for a House seat. Andrea Ramsey dropping out of the race after accusations of sexual harassment from a 2005 lawsuit resurface. She, too, is denying the allegations. Caroline Shively has more from Washington on this. Caroline, Congressman Kihuen came out with a statement today. What did he say?
Sure, he denied the allegations, Molly, and he says he wants to clear his name, but he said he still won't run for re-election. Here's a statement, quote, "The allegations that have surfaced would be a distraction from a fair and thorough discussion of the issues in a re-election campaign. Therefore, it is in the best interest of my family and of my constituents to complete my term in Congress and not seek re-election." A former campaign finance aide said she quit last year after Kihuen asked her for dates and sex and touched her inappropriately. Another woman, a lobbyist, has a very similar story about the Democrat. The House Ethics Committee is reviewing the cases. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has called on him to resign.
I've spoken on the subject. I think he should resign. He wants to go through the ethics process. That's his right to do.
Resigning is actually a way to stop a congressional review. The Ethics Committee only investigates current members. Because Kihuen will still be in Congress until January of 2019, that investigation is still underway, Molly.
And then there's this case out of Kansas. This time it's a woman that stands accused.
Yeah, Andrea Ramsey is her name. She's dropping out of her race in Kansas in the 3rd Congressional District there, although she also denies the accusations. A former male employee at a company where Ramsey worked filed a complaint with the EEOC over 10 years ago, alleging he was fired after rebuffing Ramsey's come-ons. The EEOC could find no wrongdoing, but Ramsey has now dropped out. In a statement, she said, quote, "He named me in the allegations, claiming I fired him because he refused to have sex with me. That is a lie." Ramsey also trashed her party, saying, quote, "In its rush to claim the high ground, the Democratic Party has implemented a zero-tolerance standard. I am disappointed and disillusioned by the political process." Now, that was a unique case, Molly, because the vast majority we've seen are women accusing men.
Absolutely, and it seems like every day another shoe drops on this issue in general. Caroline Shively, thank you so much for that report.
You bet.
This is going to be a huge shot in the arm to the economy. This is going to give people the opportunity to grow, to better their families, to better their lives. And that's what politics is supposed to be about, not the rigid ideologies of the liberal Washington elite. So we're going to prevail.
Republicans prepping for a couple of huge votes in the House and Senate where they now appear to be on the verge of passing tax reform. Let's bring in Alex Bolton. He is a senior staff writer for The Hill. Thanks for joining me. I appreciate it on this Saturday night.
Good evening. Thanks.
Well, let's kick off with tax reform because this is what, the big thing on Capitol Hill is expected to be this week. Republicans seem like they're celebrating a little bit. The ink has yet to hit the paper. It has yet to dry. Will we see this historic tax reform that they've been crowing about, or could something get in the way before that Christmas deadline that President Trump has talked so much about?
I don't think so. This is right at the finish line. There's going to be a vote in the House on Tuesday likely, and then a vote in the Senate likely Tuesday evening or Wednesday. As you mentioned earlier in your report this evening, it looks like maybe all Senate Republicans will vote for this. The Senate was seen as the higher hurdle, and because there was an exemption made for allowing property and state and local income taxes to be deducted up to $10,000, that should bring some people on board in the House, although there still are some folks who aren't going to vote for it, like Darrell Issa, the Republican from California. He has a very tough race, but this is seen as cruising to passage, and it's going to be a major victory for President Trump. Republicans are hungry for a win after the failure on Obamacare earlier this year.
Let's take a quick look at just a couple of bullet points. These are some of the highlights of what's expected as this tax reform goes through. The brackets changing just a tad, the highest one at 37% for individuals. Corporate tax rate, really. Now, this was really one of the big highlights that got so much attention. That rate reduced from 35 to 21%. And also the repeal of the Obamacare, the individual mandate. That was something that they wanted to see happen, or many of them. And Republicans seem like they've managed to accomplish that as well. One of the big criticisms of this is that it has benefits the wealthy more than the middle class. When will middle income, the average American, actually see the money in their pockets, and will that be really the standard going forward as to whether or not people ultimately support this really historic tax reform?
Well, Rob Portman, the senator from Ohio, Republican negotiator, I mean, he's one of the guys who's really, been behind the scenes drafting this bill. He told me that people are going to begin seeing benefits as soon as January because the withholding in the paychecks are going to be adjusted. So when you get your paycheck in January, the federal withholding is going to be a little bit less and your paycheck is going to be bumped up a little bit. So people are going to see an immediate benefit. But now the question is, how much of a benefit? And I think really the question is, as we go forward in years, does the income disparity between the wealthy and the middle class continue to grow? And if it does, even though middle class will be seeing a tax cut next year, and I think they will be happy about it, will they be happy 2 or 3 years from now? What will be the verdict on this bill, down the road? I think the strongest argument the Republicans have is that it's going to bring money back into the country. President Trump said $4 trillion overseas. That might be a little bit optimistic. But if this does generate economic growth, the 3%, maybe even 4% that Republicans are talking about, then the middle class will be happy. But based on the tax cut that they're going to see in their personal pockets, I'm not sure that's going to be enough.
Yeah, the 3 or 4%, wouldn't that be incredible? How amazing that would be? We'll see if it comes to pass, of course. One of the big criticisms of this also is that there's an expectation, some of the analysis is that it will add to the deficit. But we have this eye on the 2018 midterms. So adding to the deficit over the course of 10 years, they won't really be able to quantify that, certainly in time for this next election. So what will matter is if people are seeing those gains. And you mentioned, if the rich get richer and the middle class are seeing that greater disparity, what may matter is if those businesses, those corporations that get these benefits, if they pass them on, if they hire. I mean, is that what we're looking at? If there really is a boost to jobs for middle America, then will they be on board? And will Republicans see those gains or hold steady, much as they might otherwise, I should say?
That's a very good point. The biggest job creators in America are small businesses, and so there's a new tax rate for these small businesses. The top tax rate for pass-through businesses is going to be an effective 29.6% rate. That's a number from Ron Johnson, who fought very hard for that lower rate. And so, there are polls, surveys have been done asking small business owners if they had that extra money, what would they do? They would hire more people. There's less evidence, though, that by cutting the corporate tax rate, the big C corps, that would necessarily generate more jobs. It's more likely to go into share buybacks or dividends. We'll see. There's some historical evidence that it doesn't really create jobs. But for the pass-throughs, small businesses, there is evidence that if they have that extra money, they're going to hire more people, and that'll make the economy stronger.
All right, Alex, another shift now, big development. Counsel for the Trump transition team, Trump for America, they've written a letter to 2 congressional committees. They argue that Mueller's team inappropriately received emails from the General Services Administration, the GSA, that the agency unlawfully produced these private materials, including privileged communications, tens of thousands of emails, and attributed. So, as this goes forward, what does this actually mean?
Well, I guess some people right now are trying to lay the groundwork for Mueller being fired. I think there are some people who would like to see that. Mark Levin, a conservative, talk show host, very influential on the right. He's kind of beating the drum for Mueller to be fired. Republicans on the Hill aren't going there yet. And so, the question is, how inappropriate was this? The Trump transition team is arguing that he should have gotten a subpoena, that Mueller's team should have gotten a subpoena, to get those documents from the transition team instead of circumventing them by going to the General Services Administration, and they obtained emails and communications that had attorney-client privilege. But I'm not sure whether that is such a damning accusation. I mean, an investigator's job is to get his hands on the documents, and if he goes around the the transition team, well, that's sort of what a good investigator is supposed to do. So I'm not sure that's going to be enough to rally Republicans to push for Mueller's ouster. However, I think what's more problematic, and which John Cornyn, the Senate Republican whip, talked about today on Twitter, is that he's worried about what he calls partisans on Mueller's team. And there are 8 lawyers on that team who have given money to Democrats, 5 who gave to the Hillary Clinton for America campaign.
And when we talk about digging into who's on Mueller's team and sort of the accusations of bias against Mueller's team, I mean, the theme on Capitol Hill this week could be investigating the investigators. There are all a number of folks that are going to be up on Capitol Hill. Andrew McCabe, the deputy FBI director, to face the House Intelligence Committee next week. Bruce Orr, the demoted Deputy Attorney General, he's expected to testify on Monday behind closed doors before the Senate Intelligence Committee. When you see all of these folks that have been involved in the Hillary Clinton investigation of the emails and now in the Trump investigation regarding the possibility of Russian meddling in the election, going before investigators talking about really, their intimate feelings about regarding this president and of course about Secretary Clinton as well. I mean, what can we expect as we go into this week on Capitol Hill?
Well, now that the tax bill is going to pass, the focus is going to turn to this Mueller investigation, and already you have both sides jockeying to kind of frame the investigation and characterize it. Now, John Cornyn, as I mentioned, is talking about it being partisan and filled with partisans. Now, Ted Lieu, an outspoken Democrat from California, he shot back at Cornyn today and said, well, Christopher Wray, the FBI director, has given nearly $40,000 exclusively to Republicans. So if you're going to attack Mueller's team for political donations, you also have to look at the FBI, more wholly. So, yeah, there's going to be a lot of jockeying here, and I think. And also another point to make, Jackie Speer, a Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, she is now raising the red flag of warning and saying that there's a rumor swirling that Mueller's going to be fired at the end of the week before Christmas, and her justification for that is the House Intelligence Committee, which is run by Republicans, doesn't have any interviews set up in the new year, so it seems like they're ready to wrap up their investigation, which could be timed with Mueller getting kicked out or fired. But that seems pretty speculative, and I think she has certainly an agenda in pushing that story. She's trying to get ahead of the argument on the weekend.
And we can't help but wonder about really so many agendas that could potentially be involved in so many different sides there in Washington. A fascinating week ahead on Capitol Hill. Alex, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for inviting me.
All right, Representatives Ron DeSantis and Jim Jordan joined Justice with Judge Jeanine to weigh in on that PTT letter. That's at 9 p.m. Eastern right here on Fox News Channel. With tensions heightened between the U.S. and North Korea, the Pentagon is stepping up its preparations for a potential war in Asia by sending soldiers to train in the remote rainforests of Hawaii. The soldiers are learning unique fighting and survival techniques at the first jungle training school to be set up by the Army in decades. Jonathan Hunt picks up the story.
As dawn broke, we boarded a Black Hawk helicopter for a spectacular journey across the roof of the rainforest before being dropped in. Joining soldiers here in Hawaii, many of them veterans of the campaigns in Iraq and Afghanistan, learning to fight a very different kind of war.
The goal is to be able to teach the skills that students can survive, fight, win in a jungle environment.
No one at the 25th Infantry Division's Lightning Academy, as the jungle training school is called, will talk about policy. They won't name the threat, but they all know what might be coming. And as every Vietnam vet knows, the jungle itself is not an easy enemy to conquer, and the only way to do it is on foot.
The loud rumble of armoured Humvees is perhaps the most familiar sound from the desert and urban wars the US has been fighting. Here it is the sound of soldiers moving in almost total silence, save for the soft thud of their boots on the ground.
It's so restrictive. It's just everything's so tight.
After 2 tours in Iraq and 2 in Afghanistan, the jungle is a whole new challenge for First Sergeant George Fagali.
In Iraq and Afghanistan, I can move 5-6 kilometers in an hour while I'm dismounted. Here, I may be moving 500 meters while I'm dismounted, so it's just very restrictive.
A new experience too for Staff Sergeant Apollo Rees after 3 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq.
It's a whole different monster. In simple terms, it's completely different than being from operating over there.
These soldiers spend 3 weeks living and fighting in the jungle. Every minute designed to give them the real-world experience of potential future wars.
Oh, yes, sir. It just, like I said, makes me a force multiplier.
You'll be pretty proud of the work you're doing here.
Oh, it's all the guys. It's all the instructors. They are the ones, the NCOs, are the glue to this place, and they just make it better and better every day.
They also make the U.S. Army better prepared for whatever's next.
That's our job, is to be ready to fight the next fight.
And if the next fight is jungle-based, it will be tough, so this training is necessarily tough too. Of the 75 soldiers who began this course 3 weeks ago, just 33 made it through. At the 25th Infantry Division's Lightning Academy in Hawaii, Jonathan Hunt, Fox News.
Absolutely stellar report. One U.S. state in the throes of a historic housing crisis, how it got so bad and how Mother Nature is now making it even worse.